Blake, have you ever worked under such a creative genius as myself?
Toby, I think you forgot the word mad to pair with genius.
Welcome to the Church Gear Podcast, where we pull the tech out of the booth and onto the stage to share the most outlandish stories and hidden wisdom from the tech trenches. And now, here are your hosts.
I'm your host, Blake Hodges, a man who is still trying to find a way to explain Toby to my friends, and I'm here with the co-host in question, Toby Walters.
You think I'm not trying to figure out how to explain you to my friends and family?
Toby, that would require you to have any friends.
And I'd like to point out that, see, I just glossed over that because everybody loves me.
Sure.
Now, I like how in the intro, you didn't remove the word genius. You just put mad in front of it. I'm fine being a mad genius. I still get to be a genius.
That's a good one. That's a good tricky question. Like a good would you rather. I don't think so. I think mad geniuses end up like trying to take over the world and then the superhero has to take them out.
Yeah, it's a good point. So
Does that make me your henchman?
You are something. Yeah, I'll figure it out and I'll let you know one of these episodes, Blake. So I moved to Nashville in 2012. When did you move to? You never even lived in Nashville. You grew up in Smyrna.
Hey, Middle Tennessee, bruh. And I live in Nashville now. I pay Nashville taxes.
So it was interesting moving to Nashville when you're, in the music industry, that it's a new kind of experience. So I've heard this kind of like recurring theme and story of, children that grow up in small towns and they're incredibly talented musicians or artists or athletes in their context in their small town.
How small was that town of yours, Toby?
And I'm honestly not using myself. Like, I grew up outside of San Diego, so it wasn't a small town at all. But, for example, I have a friend who is a very talented musician, and he grew up in a small town in upstate New York. And then he came to Belmont to, study music, and all of a sudden realized, oh my gosh, there are incredibly talented musicians from other places. And now I'm kind of like a small fish in a big pond. You ever experienced that?
No, that's why I stay at Church Gear. I'm the biggest fish in this tiny pond over here.
And so moving to Nashville is a new experience because like the professionalism of like the music industry and the production industry, it's like every server at restaurants and every barista at coffee shops, like they're a professional musician. They tour out on the road. Like they're professionals everywhere in this industry.
Yeah, the joke is you could pull a couple of servers out of any Nashville restaurant and beat most bands that are not from Nashville.
And it's really not far from the truth. It happens all the time.
As much as we're funny on this podcast, it's dead true.
And so I know when I moved here, as my wife and I were looking for churches, I started to hear about this church called the Beloning Co. And it wasn't even necessarily a church at that point. It was more like a Bible study for industry professionals, for those who were touring. And it was on Tuesday nights. Blake, do you know what kind of the Nashville touring schedule is? Have you heard of this?
Yeah, isn't it like a Wednesday to Saturday so that you're back at home for church, like Sunday, Monday, Tuesday?
Almost. It's usually, honestly, Wednesday through Sunday night, because a lot of these bands, and we're talking about Christian bands specifically, like they will play at churches still on Sundays and maybe even do a concert Sunday nights, and so they wouldn't be back until Monday morning. So Tuesday night was the one guaranteed night of the week that all these people are in town if they're on that touring schedule. And so Pastor Henry and his wife Alex, they started this Bible study, the Beloning Co, for all of these industry professionals. And, it's kind of surprising as, most of us work under pastors that they're creative people by nature. That's what encourage them and spurs them to start churches. But Henry has a Grammy in audio engineering. Like, this guy is a serious creative professional.
Well, didn't he just buy that off of eBay?
I've tried to get a Grammy off eBay.
Have you really?
No.
I knew you had. Yes, you have. Be honest.
Can you imagine if I just have Grammys sitting back here and I bought them off eBay?
Who amongst us has not looked up Super Bowl rings online?
I know. So I think it's so fun for this episode to, talk about the creative process and production people working under a pastor that completely understands them. And some of the stories that came out of this episode as far as what Pastor Henry can do and interface with the production department is really fun and exciting. And maybe it'll be kind of an inspiration for our listeners to send to their pastor and say, hey, if you could understand how to, hack our digital console and insert some Waves plugins, we'd see a little more eye to eye.
Yeah, and the pastor's like, all right, how about you preach for 4 Sundays in a row? I would love to see that series where everybody switches places.
Mm-hmm. And it'd kind of be, why don't you go to seminary and why don't you study the Greek and the Hebrew of this passage and learn all the, prof references and blah, 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 blah. Like, that would be pretty funny.
Well, and what also is pretty funny is this episode. So we're going to go to our episode with Andy and Henry.
And introducing the production director, Andy Rushing, who might actually get demoted by the end of this episode, so we'll update that in a few minutes, and lead pastor, Henry Seeley of the Beloning Co. Guys, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having us. It's great to be
absolutely.
with you.
It's a pleasure.
And we actually have a couple of our guys that work here at Church Gear are members of the Belonging Co. So we've been warned that you guys are hilarious. I mean, we might have been set up for failure, so we'll find out.
No, Andy is definitely the king of comedy here. So I'm just along for the ride.
Great.
That's like Toby is here. He's just along for the ride as I'm the king of comedy of Church Gear.
Blake, you're fired.
All right.
Iron sharpens iron.
That's right.
What does iron do to a banana, though? All right.
Split it, I suppose, yes.
Okay. Before I split Toby's banana, let's move on. All right. Number one of...
Well, you haven't set up the game. You can't just jump in. What are we doing here, Blake?
You're right. I do not do a great job of introducing our segments. This is 5 Truths and a Lie, but it's different. It's not just 5 Truths and a Lie that Andy's got for us. These are things specifically to his job that his pastor might not know. So me and Toby will still guess with Henry, so he's not alone. But Pastor Henry Seeley is trying to figure out what is the lie of the 6. Number 1. I put a hole in the backstage wall with a lift right after we moved in.
That's definitely not a lie.
We've never had any lift accidents here at Church Gear.
That was one of 3 I chose to put in.
The CP60 almost fell off the forklift once when we were getting it out of storage. Is that a console?
That's a Yamaha keyboard.
Yeah.
Very rare piano.
Yeah.
I almost got the semi-truck in a parking lot when the ice storm happened.
Almost got it stuck in a parking
Got it
lot.
stuck. There we go.
Yeah, my brain. I'm coming off vacation.
Yeah.
Which is what Toby calls anytime I'm not sitting in the podcast studio.
Your brain is dumb enough without vacation, so this is even worse. Okay.
Now, Toby, how about you take over?
All right. The stage is about 3 centers off center, or 3 inches off center. Next, when we first got the alarm system, my code didn't work, and I set the alarm off and had to explain to the police who I was and why I was in the building. And finally, on a Sunday, one of our wireless mics picked up the Titans game and was unmuted in the live stream.
That is amazing.
I would say that that's the lie.
Okay, so hold on, Andy. We got to guess as well.
Yep, absolutely.
Blake, am I just allowed to guess what Henry guessed, or do we have to
think-
guess something different?
Hang on, I think Henry were you guessing or were you saying that one's not the lie at the end?
I'm guessing here.
Oh, okay, so your guess was number 6.
I feel like there's some truth. There's some plausible truth to all of the other statements. I'm trying to wrap my head around our mics picking up radio.
Okay, Blake, I'm going to guess.
That will take us into a whole new world of drama.
Blake, I'm going to guess that he did not almost get the semi-truck stuck. I'm going to guess that it's the opposite, that, if you put a semi on an ice rink, it's going to get very unstuck very fast.
I'm going to guess that the stage is not about 3 inches off center because that wouldn't be his fault. That'd be like the architect's fault. All right, Andy, what's your lie?
The Titans game. That did not happen. You knew.
Yes.
You knew.
I feel like Henry had a distinct advantage in this game.
Yeah, sorry.
It was hard. It was hard to think of something that might have. I don't know. That one seemed like it could have worked, but no, that one was a lie.
So Henry,
It would have been amazing though.
I know.
We assume that you have a bit of an advantage because you seem to have a background in production. I see a Grammy sitting behind you. So can you give us just a quick background on you and your wife and coming to Nashville and then the launch of the Belonging Co?
Yeah, absolutely. We moved to Nashville in 2012 from Australia, but I have been in music production and the worship world for probably 30 years now. Been working in and around church stuff for almost all of that, and producing records and mixing records, and part of worship movements and work with lots of different artists and worship teams over the years. And we, at the time in 2012, before we moved, we'd been living in Melbourne, Australia for almost 10 years before that, and just felt a real stir in our hearts that God was leading us to move to the States. I didn't particularly want to move to Nashville. I was like, God, if we're going to move halfway around the world, at least we could move near an ocean. And God had different ideas. And so we came to Nashville, not really with any plans for the future, really just was that God had been really specific about us moving. And so when we came to Nashville, we had no grand plans. We didn't really even know that many people in Nashville. And I just started doing what I'd been doing back in Australia. I was traveling, leading worship, and I was mixing and producing for people. And it just seemed like the more people I got to know here, especially in Nashville, the more that we began to find that there were people who were just church homeless. They, in part, a lot of them, because they were touring on a weekend, were not really around on Sunday morning very often. And in the South, church traditionally happens Sunday, 10 a.m. And that's kind of where, most of the churches were at. And so my wife and I, having been in ministry for so long, just, we felt just such a deep burden, I guess, for the people that we were encountering that were doing amazing things for the kingdom, but just didn't seem like, they had a place of community or discipleship or anything like that. And so we had been looking for a church. In fact, we spent the whole first year in Nashville trying to find a church. And during that time, we opened up our home on a Tuesday night just for, some of these people in the creative space to come and just gather and build community. And our goal at the time really was, as this grew, if we found a home church, we would bring those people with us, pass them over to the pastor and say, they're yours. But this thing kind of blew up in our basement. And after a year, we had 120, 130 people every week in our basement. And we realized that maybe God was doing something that we weren't necessarily expecting. And so in February 2014, we officially launched as a church. And we met only on Tuesday nights for about the first, 18 months. And we began to add Sundays just as Tuesday nights were kind of reaching capacity. And it really was a wild ride for us. So we're about 10 years, just a little over 10 years into this journey as a church. But, I think for me, having, been heavily involved in the worship side of things and the production side of things, and being in a city where a lot of people in our church and our community, those things are important to them. It's probably had some bearing on the way that we have facilitated and shaped church. And so, it's been a great journey, and we love what's happening and excited for it.
So you guys are in such a unique position in that you and your wife created a church, not 100% for creatives, but that seemed like very much part of the vision. And your creatives, what is sort of your philosophy of what's going to happen on stage on Sunday mornings? Are you going to be very production heavy? You're going to be very loud and flashy, or might it be different because of your unique time and space that you exist in?
Yeah. That was an interesting part of the journey for us, because we met, obviously a lot of people in the early days because they were touring. There was a sense of, when they came home off the road, they didn't necessarily want to be part of something that people would perceive to be a big production. And I get that. And that was, especially back then, that was really a big mentality in Nashville. But I think I got really challenged at one point because it was like, we're doing all these great things out on the road, but then we're almost holding back in the house of God on the weekend. And that for me just didn't seem, quite the right balance of we're gonna make ourselves look great on the stage during the week, but when we come to church, we're gonna scale it back. And I understand why people do that, and there's all sorts of reasons behind it. But I realize too that so many of our people have these creative gifts and weren't having opportunity to utilize them in the church, especially on a Sunday or a Tuesday night. And so I think for us, navigating that and walking that journey so that those things can be an important part of what we do, but they're not the focus of what we do. They're not the goal of what we do. They're simply to help facilitate our expression of worship and creativity in our church. And so, my team will tell you, I'm like, let's go all out. But the goal is that we're facilitating, that we're not a distraction, that we're helping hopefully inspire people in using our creative gifts to worship God. But if there's a moment where that feels like it's become a distraction, then we're gonna circle back, or maybe even in the moment in a meeting, it might be like, you know what, guys, that's amazing, but right now that's getting in the way. Can we let's turn that off? Let's switch out the lighting programming on that song, or let's scrap that video, whatever we need to do. And it's not to demean or belittle the hard work that people have been putting in, but it's to realize that everything we do with open hands, and we're doing it to the best of our ability, so that number one, God would be glorified, and secondly, that people would be drawn in to engage in the worship. And if at any point either of those things are not happening, then that's when we start to have a conversation about what it is that we're doing and how we're doing it.
Are there specific churches that you guys find yourself maybe intentionally or not intentionally just watching and seeing what they're doing? You're always curious about what are they doing and because they're very influential for you guys.
I mean, I'm a learner. I love to learn. I've just always been that way. So I like to pay attention to what's happening. But I'm not necessarily, I'm very rarely coming to our team saying, hey, I saw this at that church. Let's go and recreate that. I will, I'll take notice of what people are doing that I feel like is working. And then it's more of a conversation of, is any of that applicable to our environment? Is any of that going to be beneficial to our environment? How can we help, do better with what we're doing? And sometimes that's a conversation of we need some new gear. And sometimes that's a conversation of how can we better utilize what it is that we have. And I think, there's that eternal quest to always have the latest and greatest, especially in the creative and technology space. But I think one of the beautiful things about being in church is that there's always going to be a limit to the resource that you have. And so I think one of the greatest things that God has used in my life has actually been the limited resource that I've found myself with, or ourselves with at times, and having to figure out how we can, lean into that and not get stuck by the limitations that everyone else says that those things have, or even the manufacturer says that it has. Let's push into that and see if we can, take it a little further.
Andy, does that help you and your team? Just Pastor Henry's understanding of tech, where you're having conversations, you don't have to explain to him necessarily how much a new LED wall costs. He gets it intrinsically.
Yeah, I definitely think that helps. It makes conversations easier. I feel like we can get to solutions a lot quicker because we're not having to work through the explanation phase of why we need this or why it's not working. Where it's easy to get to a collaborative place of figuring out how can we do this better, or are there other options? It also keeps us honest, I think. I feel like in scenarios where maybe leadership doesn't have a production background, maybe doesn't understand it as well, sometimes it can be easy to try to get your maybe get your agenda across because you want to be the guy that uses this console, or you want to be the guy that mixes on this PA, and so you try and push that across the table because maybe they don't fully understand it, so they take your word for it. I think Henry, having the background he does and understanding and knowledge he does, it helps keep us honest so that we steward what we have, and we steward it well, and we use it to its fullest extent, because not only because we, I know I'm not going to be able to convince him of something because he probably already knows about it. But also because it creates an environment of trust and honesty where, because he knows what he knows, I also want to know as much as I can. And that keeps us in a space of not overspending or not overreaching just because we have what we have because it's what we really need. and we get the most out of it we can.
And Andy, is it ever intimidating for you to have such creative pastoral leadership that they know your world and they probably have, pretty strong opinions in that? Or is that a blessing or a curse or a little bit of both?
Honestly, I would say it's what did you say?
To be honest.
be honest. It's a blessing. I would say maybe it's not always been a blessing, at least when I first started out. But again, I attribute that to my security in my role. It's definitely been a journey being here, learning what my identity is in Christ prior to my actual role on staff. It's, when I first started, I was coming off the road, and I had been the designer, I had been the programmer. Like I had kind of sat in fairly high seats in terms of projects, and my understanding of this world was based on that. It was based on what I brought to the table, my creativity, and I had to learn quickly that that's not what matters most. And I think in any normal scenario, yeah, it could definitely be intimidating to know that your lead pastor has a Grammy or, has figured out how to do waves on Behringer, even though they said it couldn't happen, or, that could be intimidating. But I think the journey that I've had in understanding my identity in Christ and giving up that insecurity of, well, I always have to bring the best idea to the table in order to keep my spot here. Knowing that that's not the case, and that there's actually a ton of security in just listening to the Lord and doing what he asks, that has created an environment that's not intimidating at all. And it's actually a lot of fun to be challenged and encouraged by Henry to go deeper, to dig deeper, to figure out the why, to dig in and actually go, what, we have black magic cameras. That's what we own at the time. So how can we make those look as good as possible, even though people say that camera quality is capped with those? How can we push past that? Well, it isn't intimidating. It's fun, and it's fun to be challenged. And honestly, it's fun to have the conversations. It's cool to sit in a room with him and go, hey, I think we should upgrade to this, or I think we should do this. And it's not just well, how much is it going to cost? It's actually a back and forth on, well, if it can do this, what if it does this? And if it does that, how can we use it this way? And it actually cultivates a really collaborative environment where I think we can get to goals that maybe are not normally achieved, just because we do have that collaboration.
And of course, our listeners are going back about a minute and wondering, you applied waves to a Behringer X32. Can we hear the inside scoop on that?
Yeah. So when we started our church, we didn't have any budget, and we were, renting venues for the first 5 or 6 years of church. And so one of the first things that we got, somebody bought for us a Behringer X32. And I was like, I'm not intimidated by, brands, by labels. I've been around long enough to realize that it's usually operator error. If something doesn't sound great, it's rarely the gear. So we dug in, and I realized that we could utilize waves to some degree with the console, but what I really wanted was to have, waves chain on the master bus, and that just wasn't possible with the setup. And so I figured out a way to use an audio interface and go analog out back into another rig, and or in fact into the same rig, but through different channels. And we were doing master bus inserts and all this stuff. But I had spent several hours on the phone with the guys from both Waves and Behringer, who were just very adamant that it wasn't possible. And so we figured out how to do it, and we did that for a long time. And so when we bought our first PA, we had a DMBJ series PA, and we were still using a Behringer X32 at front of house and an X32 rack at monitors because we didn't have any monitor guys. And so everyone was just mixing monitors on their phone. But, it actually sounded pretty incredible through that PA. So we actually only upgraded because we ran out of channels. I mean, literally 32 channels was all we had. And so we ran out. We maxed that out in the first year or so. But it was fun really pushing into that.
I feel like you're going to get an influx of applications from production guys that want to work for a pastor that knows how to apply waves into a master bus of an X32.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, bring them on. Bring them on.
Okay, Blake has been begging to get, he wants conflict. Blake, you're
I'm an Enneagram 8.
Yeah.
We're a-holes for a living. I mean, we're jerks for a living. I mean, we enjoy conflict. And throughout this series, everyone's been so positive. We did a survey, surveying production people about their pastors, and even those responses were overwhelmingly positive, which is good. Like, I'm happy about that, but I really want to push the needle here and make an impact. So I'm thinking, can we get some story of you guys where you worked through something? Maybe something wasn't easy, even though you already understand each other. And the fact that y'all already understand each other so much might make this story even more impactful. That, hey, even when you totally get each other's worlds, I know you're thinking, tech guy listening right now, if only my pastor knew. Well, Andy's pastor does know, and maybe they still had a kerfluffle.
Yeah. Well, Andy might have his own stories to bring, and so I want to give him space to do that. But actually, I know that you're looking for conflict, but I actually want to honor the fact that Andy has had an incredible way of not avoiding conflict for the sake of being a peace keeper, but actually confronting in a way that has been confrontational to the degree that it's needed to be, but also been big enough to say, you know what, I need to yield in these areas. And so, we had a situation, I think it was conference last year or the year before, where Andy had done, I think it was conference last year, just an incredible, like the lighting and video design was incredible. And so was the price tag attached to it. And, we realized, we could have done it, but it wasn't going to be, this wasn't going to be the wisest thing for us to do. And, Andy had been overseeing the team that had put a lot of work into that. And what I love about Andy is, he's always going to bring what he thinks is the right thing to do, and some great ideas. But rather than digging his heels in and saying, no, this is what we need to do, he actually was like, I understand that there's a bigger picture here. And so without any, at least to me, without any reaction or response, he just went away and said, you're right. Like we actually need to rethink this, and came up with something just as incredible that was not as expensive. But, I think that's been actually the hallmark of the team and just how it's been led. I know that you guys are digging for dirt here, but there really isn't, unless Andy's got some stories that he wants to tell. But I think, that is traditionally what it's been like, in church environments, especially with production, and that tension between, a senior pastor and the production people. There is oftentimes tension, but I think we've actually worked really hard to have a very honest, upfront, environment where there's not conflict and there's not negative conflict, negative reactions to conflict. There's always, it's not bad to have conflict. You need conflict, but it's how you resolve conflict that I think is the most important thing.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to let you down, but it's not, there really hasn't been. I think, that conference example last year is a good one. And I think a couple years ago, there was a moment where we had just updated some gear, some networking stuff, and we were having some waves dropouts at front of house and clicking and popping. It was clocking issues that were happening during service, and I know, and we sat down. Me and Henry and a few other guys sat down in a meeting and kind of came to an ultimatum of like this is affecting people's experience in worship. Like, there's not another choice but to figure it out. And I mean, honestly, that's about as conflicty as it gets, or disagreeing as it gets. But it's really those moments of going, Like, because it's never about me. It's never about Henry. Like, nothing is ever personal in that regard. It's always about the vision, which I think is what's really unique about working here. Like conference last year, in that moment where we were having issues with videos playing back correctly and iMac looking correct on the LED wall, and it was an issue. It affected the vision. And it wasn't that moment where, Henry said, like, hey, we got to figure this out, that I was frustrated because it was going to push me. It was one of those, like, I can get mad that he's asking me to spend a bit more time on this when I'd love to go sleep. But realistically, when I look at the screens, there's a problem. And if I want to be involved in this, I can either hang on to my pride and go, I'm like, we're not going to deal with it. This is just what it is. Or I can go, you know what, this is affecting the vision and it doesn't look great. And I want to take the lower road of figuring it out so that ultimately the vision can be better. And I think that's probably why, honestly, we've not had a lot of conflict or disagreement, bad conflict or disagreement, because we've always kept the vision at the forefront. And I think, it's not Henry's vision. It's God's vision. And I think because of that, I trust that he hears what he's supposed to hear and tells me that. So therefore, I'm not trusting Henry as a person. I'm trusting Holy Spirit in Henry to give me the vision. And because of that, it's not difficult for me to just go, you know what, that's right. Let's go that route. Let's dig in. Let's figure it out. I'm not saying by any means that I'm always humble or I'm always taking the low road. There's definitely times where my flesh goes, man, I really want to be right. But I can either push to be right and eventually work myself out of a position on the team because I'm just unwilling to submit, or I can submit and do what's necessary for the vision. And you know what? If it's wrong, I'm not always going to have to take the fall for that because I did what I was supposed to do. And I think those environments are where you can avoid the bad conflict and ultimately have healthy relationships with everybody on your team.
Yeah. Can I just touch on one thing that you said too, Andy? I love that you said that you're carrying the vision, but you're not just a carrier of the vision. You are part of establishing the vision. And I love that, the last couple of years for conference, just the look and the production aspect of things have not been driven by me. It's, Andy's come to us and said, I was in worship last year at conference and God actually gave me a vision, or there was a moment where God woke me up in the night and actually showed me, hey, do this, or, draw this out. And I actually love that collaboration, that it's not, it's not an environment. I'm definitely a visionary. I love, I know where we're going for sure, but it's not a one-man show. Alex and I are not, it's not this leadership realm where we just tell you and you just go and do your thing. And there's times where we're going to be strong of like, we know where we're going. Let's get on board with that. But I think, establishing those parameters and then giving the team freedom to be able to dream and create and not just do something for the sake of it, but actually get that God dream and that God vision of like, God, what's going to be impacting for people. And I just want to honor you, Andy, because you've done such a phenomenal job of that. It's been amazing to see you grow into that.
Thank you.
Blake, I feel like some of our listeners have a single tear trickling down their cheek right now and thinking, I wish I had that relationship with my pastor. Now, Andy, what I really want to know is if you are in a difficult conversation, receiving a correction, is it better or worse when it comes from an Australian accent?
Depends. Sometimes it's better because it's just easier to listen to that accent. Sometimes it's worse because I might not understand everything.
You're like, what did you say?
A misinterpretation.
Does his accent get more pronounced the more excited or angry he is?
Yeah.
Honestly, I feel like it's watered down at this point. I think you've been here long enough that it's, it's watered down a little bit.
And who is scarier to get a correction from, Pastor Henry or Pastor Alex?
Say me.
It depends. It depends on the moment. It definitely depends on the moment. I think they both share amazing qualities in that regard.
Good save.
Yeah. Listen, my wife thinks the absolute world of Andy. Andy's one of her favorite people because Andy knows how to make her laugh. And anyone that can make my wife laugh is like at the top of the list. So.
Blake, you could be her new favorite.
You know, Toby, I think I got gifted to make you laugh, and that's about it. Everyone else just thinks I'm an idiot.
That's about it. Henry, talk to us about pastoring creatives. You have a unique spot where you're at the Beloning Co and just the DNA of the church. How is it different to pastor creatives and specifically production creatives in your experience?
I think, creatives in general, it's understanding that sometimes, we put creatives into a bucket like they're all the same, and that's not true. But creative people can, by nature, be a little more emotional at times. I would say not as much in the production side of things, more so probably in the musical side of things, because they're the more fluffy people, right? I'll just put myself in there as well. But I think it's understanding that there is, an expression of who someone is, but also, with all of us, there's the weaknesses of our flesh that wants to get in the way. And I think sometimes we accommodate those negative weaknesses because we think that's part of the creative expression, where, I've been married for 26 years. And, my wife has just not tolerated that kind of side of things, and I think I've realized as I've got older that some of those negative things that we allow our creatives to express along the way, and it's not to shut them down, but it's actually to bring people to maturity of like, actually, how's the best way for me to respond? And so I think, understanding some of those nuances along the way is really important. I think what I've seen over the years as far as production teams have been concerned, in a lot of churches, and this certainly doesn't go for all churches, but in a lot of churches that I had witnessed over the years, there seemed, this great divide between, say, the production side of things and the, worship or, music or creative side of things. And then, then the senior leadership there, some are over here, and there just seemed to be a lot of disconnect. And so I think one of the things that I've been really intentional, and this, predates the Belonging, but just in all of my years of ministry, the more I've become aware of that, the more I've been really intentional about trying to bring all of those areas and those people together. And I think that's been one of the beautiful things at the Belonging is, we have a lot of people that serve, say, on live stream mix or monitors or in different parts of the production side of things, are actually phenomenal musicians or worship leaders themselves. And they might spend their week out on the road playing guitar for somebody, but then they come back on the weekend and they're mixing monitors or they're mixing front of house. And I think it actually gives them such a great perspective of, what a good mix is, because they understand the musicality of it. And so, I think we've worked and we'll continue to work really hard to make sure that, our production and our worship teams and those creative spaces really do work together. And that takes I think a lot of humility and discipline and, an ongoing maturity. And so I think there's some of the things that we've really leaned into with our team. And it's just, I don't know if it's just the older I get, but I've got no space for drama. Like life's too short for drama. And I think unnecessary drama. I put this phrase on my phone at the start of the year on my home screen, and it says eliminate sideways energy. And I think drama is one of those things that's just sideways energy. You spend your time that you could be being productive or advancing or doing something creative on you, dealing with unnecessary drama just because of immaturity. That's such a waste of time. And so I think helping people realize that of like, let's leave the stuff and let's mature and let's walk this out. And so, I think it's a real joy to be part of a church. And I think for us, in Nashville especially, sound is a big deal. A good portion of our church producers or musicians or songwriters, or at least people that really are immersed in music, on a regular basis. And so understanding that part of who's going to be attending on a weekend or watching on a stream, the sound matters to them. We haven't got it right. We're on our journey, we're on our way to get it right. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes it's not so great. We don't make an idol out of it, but we do want the best that we can to take that distraction out of the way for people. And so I think even those things, just, realizing that in different cities, the different demographic and the people that are part of your church are going to be impacted by different things within that church community. So I think that's been a fun thing. Sometimes I'm talking and I'll use a Pro Tools illustration and people get it. And I'm like, yeah. I mean, where else, what other cities do people, but welcome to Nashville. So.
Andy, has it helped, with you being a designer and a creative on tour with artists? Has it helped you now in your role at TBC you're essentially still working with artists, Cody and Carrie and the rest of the worship crew, like that you know how to enact an artist's vision? Does that help, bridge that gap between production and worship in the church for you guys?
Maybe so, I think. Maybe it's my personality. I don't know. I've always had a great relationship with whoever I've worked with. But I also think I don't know, like Henry says to, don't waste your time on sideways energy. For me, it's like, if you're not going to have a good time, then what's the point in even doing it? So it's been easy for me to have a good relationship with people. Especially in that work environment. So I suppose in a way, I guess touring like that has helped me maybe understand how to be normal around people who are on stage. Cause I think it's easy for people to be idolized. So I think that's helped me in a way. And it's also helped me have those conversations when people don't understand how to do that. But I guess if for anything, I've been lucky enough to work with people who are very creative. And so I guess in that regard, that relationship of trying to create a live experience of something they've created musically and being able to interpret that with like visuals and the stage. I would say that experience definitely helped in terms of kind of being able to now use that knowledge to translate live experiences as the team begins to develop worship songs and what they hear from the Lord in terms of music. There's just such an easy flow between us and them that it's really easy for me to pick up on that vision and then go, okay, here's what I am seeing as far as a live interpretation of that. And there, long before I ever came on staff here, there was such a good relationship between worship and production that, for me, it's just, it was easy for me to fit in. There's not bitterness or conflict or resentment between the two. And I think that kind of unity helps cultivate, easy vision, I think, and easy execution of vision. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah. And Blake, I'm thinking we need to send you on tour to teach you to be normal, just like Andy.
Man, from some of the fun stories I've heard about being on tour, I definitely want to go, and I definitely think it'll make me weirder. Just the funny stuff we've heard that can only go on Church Gear After Dark.
Wow. Guys, I'm going to put you on the hot seat for a second. You're right in the heart of Nashville with the touring industry, which is constantly pulling people out to try and fill empty seats out on the road. How do you guys try and keep up with, competitive salaries to keep, good people at TBC? Is that, a tough balance to pay what people deserve while also trying to balance just being, honoring of your resources, good stewards of the church's resources? Yes.
And yes. It's, I think it's challenging. I think, most churches would say it's challenging, to find that balance of stewarding the resource of the church while also honoring the gift and, by a salary of the people that are on the team. And I think, at the end of the day, and this is a conversation that my wife and I will have, with almost any staff member or potential staff member. At the end of the day, and this doesn't negate the need for a good salary, but it's got to be a calling. We're not looking for people. We're not looking for resumes. You can tell me, a resume can tell me anything that actually doesn't tell me much about you. You can make up whatever you want in a resume. What's valuable to us are the people that understand who we are as a church, what we're trying to accomplish as a church, and how to be part of a team. I think that's the most valuable thing. And, at some point, somebody's going to have to make a decision of, I might be making less by being part of a church staff, but that's where I feel called to. And, we're open-handed with our team. It's one of the other things that I've been passionate about over the years is, if someone does feel like their time on staff has come to an end, traditionally, I think in church environments, it's easy for those people to be, either pushed out or alienated, or somehow we've set up this thing that, being on church staff is the pinnacle. I don't believe it's the pinnacle. I think it's, if that's the season that you're in, that God's called you to, then that's the place that you need to be. And if that season ends, you're no less valuable to us as a person or your family as people. You're part of our church. And so, we've worked really hard to try and keep strong relationships with people who have been on our staff over the years. And so sometimes people have left because, actually they needed to step into a new season, whether that was financially or just experience-wise or whatever that is. And so, I think it is challenging for churches, but finding people that are called, I think they understand that sometimes that sacrifice is actually part of the calling. And so, with that, as we grow, they grow. And, hopefully salaries will grow, and that's all part of us doing it together. So,
do you feel like, is there a unique advantage you have being in Nashville that you can pull in industry people that are part of your church that say like, oh, sure, I'm happy to mix monitors on a Sunday. It's just, it's my ministry to the church. Or do you guys use some contractors to help build it out? Or is it, volunteer and staff?
It's volunteers. We've really built a strong volunteer culture. And again, this is, I'm speaking on behalf of our church, what we feel is important to us. I'm not saying that we're right or anyone else is wrong. I know that there are churches where they pay pay musicians, or some churches might pay, contractors for sound or video on the weekend. I think for me, it's like, okay, if we're going there, well then, are we paying kids workers? Are we paying car park attendants? Are we paying greet? Like, it's not to say that anyone's role is more or less valuable. I think what we've established is a culture of, hey, it's a privilege, and I don't mean this in a subservient way that we need people to do this and have this, low sense of their value. But actually, for all of us, it's a privilege. When we come to that back door, we check our name at the door. It's not about our name, and the worship leaders will tell you the same thing. We don't advertise who's worship leading at church. We all come and volunteer our time in the house of God. So we do have obviously some salaried staff, but they've more than done their 40 hours from Monday through Thursday. There's no doubt, and anyone on a church staff would say amen to that. But so we've worked really hard to build a volunteer culture on the weekend, and so that it's kind of leveled the playing field, if that makes sense. You don't have a worship leader who's more valuable than somebody who's less experienced. We're all in this together. And so the same with production people. And that's challenging at times as well. When COVID shut the world down, everybody was home and it was amazing. And, we had more volunteers than we knew what to do with. But then as soon as touring started up again, it's like, okay, we don't have a monitor guy for 2 weeks. What are we going to do? And so, but I think that's a great challenge of who is there that we need to be investing in to raise up that's going to be the next generation. And so, we're always, training up and releasing people to serve in youth or in kids or in other meetings throughout the week to build that experience. And the beautiful overflow from that is a lot of these people have actually got their skill and experience, at least initially in church, and have been able to go out on the road and take that to another level. And then, I think the beautiful exchange of serving in the house of God has actually been a huge benefit to people.
And let's theoretically say another pastor is calling you up and saying, Henry, you are a production person. Like, you've done this in your background. I'm trying to recruit people to my church. And yes, it's very much a calling. We're requesting a high level of expertise to run our production systems, but we can't get anybody. What kind of conversations are you having from a creative perspective, from a production perspective, to try and help educate them on it? Well, if you want somebody great who's going to move to Kansas or, California or wherever it is and afford to live there, you got to think of it differently than, your youth pastor, your small groups pastor. Like, how do you have that conversation?
Yeah. Again, I think that's a really interesting conversation. And I think something that a lot of churches, I think even in this economy right now, are finding this of people, they want to serve, but it's hard, financially. And so I think there is that sense of, it probably sounds cliche, but really asking God to open your eyes to the right people. And I think sometimes we're looking for experts to come in from outside, and sometimes we need that. But sometimes there's actually people that are in our midst that right now they don't have quite the experience, but they've got the passion and the desire and the love for the church. And, if I look at my own life, when I started going to this particular youth ministry when I was 16, really gave my heart to the Lord just before I turned 19. And, I didn't know, I loved music, but I didn't really know anything about production. We didn't even have a major studio in the town that I grew up in. But I was passionate about making our youth ministry the best that it could be. And so I would spend hours on a Saturday setting up a PA. I'd set up mics. I set up a cassette deck so that I could record a 2-track, because that's how old I am. And, I would listen back every week to how it sounded, so that I could come back the next week and try and figure out how we could make this PM some old Yamaha PM with 2 channels of digital effects built into it. How do we make this sound as good as it could be? And so it was actually that passion in me that my pastors saw, that even though I didn't have the experience, the passion was what drove me to get better at it. And so I think you need great people on your team that can help invest in the next generation, but it's easy if you've got resource just to go and hire a lot of people. But I don't think you keep people by doing that necessarily. I think there's got to be that investment in that heart connection. And that's one of the other things that we'd love to do as a team. We're not just drawing from our team. For Alex and I, for our pastoral staff, our executive team, we care about the people on our team. We're investing in them. We're pouring into them. We're praying for them. We're coming around them. We're doing stuff together as a staff. So it doesn't feel like it's just this, hey, that's my job and I get my paycheck. And not in a weird way of like, well, we're all this, family, but there is a sense of this is more than just a job. And so I think that investment in people, as a pastor, if you're looking for somebody to be running your production team, you might need to advertise, but don't overlook the people that maybe are in your church right now that maybe aren't quite as skilled or as equipped as they could be. But maybe you put some investment into upskilling them rather than just paying somebody to come and do a job.
Yeah. No, it's great. And I think a good exercise for Andy would be to give him all the equipment that you started with at that youth ministry and say, I want you to produce Sunday morning with this gear, and see how well he does.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. Not for my sanity or his.
So we like to wrap all our episodes with something we call a tech takeaway. And in this series, we're doing a sort of 2 sides of the same coin. So we're going to ask each of you a question. So Pastor Henry, first to you, if you were in a room full of production directors and you could communicate something to them to help them understand their pastor better, what would you want to say to them?
That's a great question. I think a lot of the tension that I see in churches is because, there is a breakdown in that relationship, or maybe there's just never been a fostering of that relationship. And so, I think for a lot of pastors, it's actually intimidating, especially if you've got people on your team that are, they are great at what they do, or you've got great gear or great resource in your church, but as a pastor, it's not where you want it to be. And if you don't have the experience and the understanding to be able to tell them what that is. I think that's honestly a pretty intimidating place to be as a pastor. I'm very thankful that I have experience, and so I can speak to my team about a lot of these things. But I think, if you're a production person, it's easy to take the attitude of just like, my pastor doesn't get me, and I'm just going to get frustrated at that. But I think seeing, and I make no promises on behalf of any other pastor, but seeing if they would spend, have lunch with you or spend some time just building that relationship and not being afraid to ask your pastor, and this, again, this might be an intimidating question for some of you guys or girls who are watching this, but actually ask them about the vision. Don't say to them, hey, what do you want for the sound system? But ask them about the vision of the church and how you can be a part of fulfilling that. Because as you build that trust with them, and they see that you're actually invested in their vision, not just your department's vision, I think that will build trust and help them to realize, actually, this person, this guy, this girl, they're here because they want to be here, not just because they're for a job. And so, that might be a bit of a journey ahead. That's not going to happen in a week. But I think even over the next 6 months or the next year, being intentional about building that and expressing your heart to serve their vision, I think will go a long way for you.
Yeah, that's great. Andy, we're going to throw it over to you. If you were in a room full of other pastors, or maybe you want to, direct this, right to Henry, but what is something you wish that pastors could understand about their production people?
You've been waiting for this.
Yeah. No, you already know everything. I think for me, the one thing I would like to kind of say to pastors in that regard would be grace. I think grace is critical to a healthy relationship, not a blind eye to faults or mistakes, but just grace. We desperately don't want things to go wrong as much or more than the pastors don't want things to go wrong. So, in that environment, it is a level of insecurity that can exist of not wanting something to go wrong. And so I think for pastors to maybe understand that in that typical production environment, there can usually kind of be rough and tough exteriors that are built up over years of holding tightly to personal creativity. When you mix, how it sounds is very close and personal to you because it's what you offer creatively. So building up that rough exterior to kind of protect that insecurity of what you bring to the table. And I think if you can cultivate an atmosphere of grace with your team and love and honesty and trust, if you can prioritize those things over anything else, you will slowly begin to break down that wall of toughness or insecurity, and get to that vulnerable place with the team where they realize you're in it for them, not what they bring to the table. And I think as long as you allow that environment of what they bring to the table is more important than them, then you'll never be able to break down that wall of non-communication or that wall of bitterness or frustration. But if you can put aside that and understand that you love them, show them grace, and show them Christ, that insecurity will eventually go away because they will trust your investment in them more than what they bring to the table. And I think that is probably some of the building blocks of that healthy relationship with your team.
Yeah, that's awesome. We always ask our guests if there's anything they want to plug or shout out. And I'm, curious specifically on the Beloning Co College that I know, one of our guys here at Church Gear is part of the Beloning Co College. So if you want to sort of pitch that to the community where, it's a place to learn production.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we have a college that we started a couple of years ago here at the Beloning. We run that in conjunction with Southeastern University. It was really important for us when we were talking about setting up a school that we didn't want to just teach church culture and send you away with a certificate, even though those things can be really, important. But we wanted young people to be able to walk away with something that the world, recognizes as well. Maybe they wanted to transfer in or transfer out. And so, we have a fully accredited course through SEU in conjunction with SEU. And we have actually quite a few facets and streams, one of those being a production course that we just launched in this last year. And so we're learning some things about the learning situations. So our course is growing. But, I think there's something really powerful about, having a college in a church context, especially a church that I think, a church that's passionate about worship and production, being able to come and learn that in an environment that has a real world, practical and spiritual outworking to it, I think is really awesome. So if you want to know more about it, go to Beloning.co/college and we'll let you know all the details.
That's great. Blake, it's actually your work son here at Church Gear that a year ago he wanted to work at Church Gear and go to the Beloning Co College, and now he's living his dream.
We should ask him what he loves the most now that he's doing both.
Ooh, yeah. You'll really put him on the spot. He'll get in trouble.
Yeah, and I'd love to know what he would like to see done better from the Beloning Co College point of view as well. We're not afraid to learn ourselves.
We'll get an anonymous survey going from the one person at Church Gear that also goes to the Beloning Co College. This would be great.
Anonymous.
That's right.
Single entry survey.
That's amazing.
Well, Henry and Andy, we thank you guys so much for coming on. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Appreciate what you do. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for hanging out with us. We hope to see you back next week for more absurd stories, tech takeaways, and overall buffoonery here at the Church Gear Studios.
Blake, I'm really hoping that the result of this series is that church techs can understand their pastors better and that there will be a, just better line of communication and relationship between them.
Yeah, and if, with the pay series, you couldn't really send that to your pastor, right? That'd be kind of weird.
It depends on how you do it, and we even talked about that on the pay series, how to do this, respectfully and not passive-aggressively.
But with this one, you're saying, hey, I just want to get to know you better. So send it to your pastor. Be like, hey, listen to this series with me, and at the end of it, we'll go out and have coffee and talk about our takeaways, any ways we can work better together.
And I sent it to my pastor, and all he said was, fire Blake.